They hate the company they are buying from. 94% of its customers report a negative experience. Its net promoter score is negative 62. The average company that fails scores around 0. But Ticketmaster did not fail. In 2025 alone, it processed 346 million tickets and earned a 37% profit margin, one of the highest of any company on the planet. Think about that. Apple makes people wait in line to give them money. Ticketmaster makes people furious just to take it. Same result, completely different design. In November 2022, Ticketmaster's website collapsed. 14 million people trying to buy tickets at once. The system was built for 1.5 million. Congress called an emergency hearing. A sitting senator compared the company to a mafia, and in April 2026, a federal jury agreed. But here is where it gets strange. Days after the verdict, the CEO of Live Nation, Ticketmaster's parent company, went on national television. He said, and I quote directly, that a company controlling over 70% of primary concert ticketing is not a monopoly. One of them is lying. And which one it is tells you everything about how power actually works in this country. But that is not even the most disturbing part of the story. Back in 2020, federal prosecutors proved that Ticketmaster executives held a company-wide summit. Inside that summit, they projected stolen passwords onto a screen. They used those passwords to access a competitor's private systems, live, in front of dozens of employees. And then they promoted the people running it. So the question is not just whether Ticketmaster is a monopoly. The question is who they are, how they really make their money, and why a company designed to be despised is one of the most profitable machines on earth. Ticketmaster finally exposed the monopoly that profits from your rage. Strategy Lens covers the corporations that shape the world, the real financial architecture behind the headlines, the decisions made in rooms you will never be in, the models that explain why industries work the way they do. If you want to understand how power actually operates, not the version they teach in business school, subscribe. Because the next few things we are going to tell you about Ticketmaster are not on Wikipedia. To understand Ticketmaster, you have to understand what concerts looked like before it existed. It is 1975. You want to see the Rolling Stones. You line up at a physical box office. At the venue itself, you hand cash to a human being. You get a paper ticket. The fee? Zero. The music industry in the 1970s was fragmented, chaotic, and genuinely competitive. Dozens of regional promoters competed for artists. Venues set their own prices. No single company could hold the industry hostage because no single company could see the whole board. That was about to change. Three men, Fred Rosen, Albert Leffler, and Gordon Gunn, founded Ticketmaster in 1976 in Phoenix, Arizona. But the company that would become the toll booth of American entertainment was not built around a concert. It was built around a computer. Fred Rosen's insight was deceptively simple. In 1982, he convinced the Los Angeles Forum, one of the biggest arenas in the country, to let him install computer terminals at retail outlets across the city. Fans could now buy tickets at a Tower Records 10 miles from the venue. For the first time, distribution was decoupled from the box office. Rosen charged a service fee for this convenience. In 1982, that fee seemed reasonable. It was a technology service. You were paying for access. But here is what Rosen understood that nobody else in the room did. The service fee was not a fee. It was a tax. And the beauty of a tax is that the person paying it does not get to negotiate. Rosen structured Ticketmaster's contracts so that the venue received a percentage of the service fee. The venue did not just tolerate Ticketmaster's fees, they actively profited from them, which meant they had zero incentive to switch to a cheaper competitor. The financial interests of the middleman and the venue were permanently aligned against the consumer. This was not a bug. It was the founding logic of the entire company. Through the late 1980s, Rosen expanded aggressively. He signed exclusive long-term contracts with venues across the country. If you wanted your concert tickets distributed through Ticketmaster, you surrendered exclusivity. No competing ticketing company could touch your inventory. By 1991, Ticketmaster had acquired most of its major regional competitors. By 1994, it controlled an estimated 70% of the market, 3 decades before the DOJ lawsuit. And that is the year the first public challenge arrived. In May 1994, Pearl Jam filed a complaint with the Department of Justice. The band wanted to tour without using Ticketmaster. They tried to book shows at venues outside Ticketmaster's network. What they discovered was that the network had no edges. Virtually every major arena and amphitheater in the country was under exclusive contract. Pearl Jam told Congress directly. They could not tour without going through Ticketmaster. The alternative was playing smaller venues and absorbing the revenue loss. The DOJ investigated for a year, then dropped the case. Insufficient evidence of illegal monopolization, they said. Ticketmaster absorbed the reputational hit and kept going. Nobody in 1994 could have predicted what that precedent would cause consumers over the next 30 years. But the decision to let it slide was the first link in a chain that would end in a federal courtroom in 2026. 1998, Barry Diller and the IAC machine. In 1998, Ticketmaster was acquired by Barry Diller's USA Networks, later rebranded as IAC. Diller brought Ticketmaster into a media and technology conglomerate. For the first time, Ticketmaster had access to serious capital, and a parent company that understood the internet was not a threat. It was an accelerant. Ticketmaster.com launched and became one of the highest traffic e-commerce destinations on the early web. While other companies were figuring out how to sell books and DVDs online, Ticketmaster was already selling 40 million tickets a year digitally. But the internet also created a problem Rosen had never anticipated: the secondary market. When eBay launched and scalpers discovered they could resell tickets at 2, 3, 5 times face value with zero friction, the economics of live events changed permanently. And Ticketmaster watched for years as scalpers extracted billions of dollars from its ecosystem until it realized something. Scalpers were not its enemy. Scalpers were its business model. We will come back to that. 2010, the merger that changed everything. The merger that created the modern live entertainment monopoly was approved on January 25th, 2010. Live Nation, the world's largest concert promoter, merged with Ticketmaster, the world's largest ticketer. The combined entity immediately controlled promotion, ticketing, venue management, and artist representation. One company, the entire live music supply chain. The DOJ allowed it to happen, but they attached conditions. A 10-year consent decree. Live Nation was forbidden from retaliating against venues that chose competing ticketing software. They were required to license their technology to a competitor, AEG, to ensure a viable rival existed. The government was essentially saying, we know this merger creates dangerous market power, so we will rely on behavioral rules to contain it. It was the same logic they applied to Standard Oil in 1911. It failed then too. The DOJ did not break up the company. They put it on a diet and told it not to eat too much, and then they left the room. What happened next was entirely predictable, and we have the internal emails to prove it. Here is what nobody tells you about Live Nation's business model. They are not a concert company. They are a flywheel. The three-segment architecture. Live Nation reports 3 operating segments. Understanding how they relate to each other is the only way to understand the company's real power. Segment 1. Concerts. In 2025, this generated $20.9 billion in revenue, 82% of the total. It sounds dominant until you see the margin, 3.3%. Live Nation spends nearly $15 billion a year guaranteeing artist payouts and securing tours. They barely break even. Segment 2. Ticketing. Ticketmaster. In 2025, this generated $3.1 billion. 12% of total revenue, margin 37%. Segment 3, sponsorship and advertising, $1.3 billion, 5% of revenue, margin 64%. Do you see it? The division that generates 82% of revenue operates at a 3% margin. The division that generates 12% of revenue operates at 37%. Live Nation is not a concert promotion company that also does ticketing. It is a high margin financial platform that funds its concert division as a loss leader. Think of it like this. Gas stations make almost nothing on fuel. The margins are razor thin, but the fuel gets you into the parking lot. Inside is where the money is: the coffee, the snacks, the car wash. For Live Nation, the concerts are the fuel. Ticketmaster and sponsorship are the car wash, and you do not get to choose whether you stop there. The flywheel, how the machine actually works. Here is the private briefing version. Live Nation overbids to secure a massive stadium tour. Taylor Swift, Beyonce, The Weeknd. They offer guarantees so high that the concerts division barely breaks even. Sometimes it loses money. Why? Because by controlling the tour, Live Nation ensures three things. 1. The tour routes through Live Nation owned venues, where they capture 100% of food, beverage, parking, and VIP revenue. 2. Ticketmaster becomes the exclusive ticketer, generating $1.1 billion in pure profit. 3. The tour is wrapped in Live Nation corporate sponsorships, contributing to that 64% margin sponsorship business. The concert is not the product, the concert is the delivery mechanism. The product is the toll booth you have to pass through to get to it. The advanced strategy: buying monopoly in cash. Now, here is something almost nobody outside the industry knows. When Ticketmaster signs a new venue to an exclusive contract, they do not just win the business, they buy it. Ticketmaster pays venues enormous upfront cash advances in exchange for exclusive multi-year ticketing rights. A venue signs a 5 to 10 year exclusive deal. They get millions of dollars today in cash. In 2025, the amortization of these non-recoupable ticketing contract advances totaled $88.4 million in a single year. And because Live Nation owns or operates over 460 venues globally, Ticketmaster is frequently paying advances to its own sister subsidiaries. Money moves from one pocket to the other, and every independent promoter who tries to route a tour through a Live Nation venue is contractually forced to use Ticketmaster. You cannot compete with a company that is its own best customer. The float, how Ticketmaster became a shadow bank. There is one more financial mechanism that almost never appears in coverage of this company, and it is the kind of thing that makes forensic analysts pause. When you buy a ticket 6 months before a show, you hand Ticketmaster your money. The show has not happened yet. The artist has not performed yet, but Ticketmaster holds that cash. At the end of 2024, Live Nation held $1.3 billion in ticketing client cash, plus $4.1 billion in event-related deferred revenue. By year-end 2025, deferred revenue alone sat at $4 billion. Live Nation is not just a ticketing company. It is a bank running on your money, paying you zero interest. In the high interest rate environment of 2023 through 2025, the interest income on $5 billion in consumer cash was a massive, passive, almost invisible revenue stream, hidden inside the balance sheet, available to almost no public scrutiny. This is the machine at its peak. Total revenue in 2025, $25.2 billion. Cash generation, $1.4 billion in operating cash flow. A company that has turned the act of going to a concert into one of the most precisely engineered extraction mechanisms in the history of entertainment. And yet, in November 2022, the whole thing cracked. Publicly, spectacularly. And the crack ran all the way back to the founding logic. What you are about to hear is sourced from federal court documents, Department of Justice filings, SEC 10K disclosures, and congressional testimony. Every claim has a source. Every number is from the official record. This is not opinion. This is what the documents say. The Scalper Syndicate, they built in secret. For years, Ticketmaster publicly presented itself as the victim of the scalping economy. Malicious bots, criminal brokers, bad actors exploiting the system. The company spent millions lobbying Congress to crack down on ticket scalpers. They deployed anti-bot technology, They testified before Senate committees about the scourge of secondary market manipulation. In July 2018, investigative journalists from the CBC and the Toronto Star attended the Ticket Summit in Las Vegas. They went undercover, posing as professional scalpers. Ticketmaster representatives told them about TradeDesk. TradeDesk was Ticketmaster's proprietary, secret inventory management system, built exclusively for professional scalpers. Company representatives were filmed on camera explaining that Ticketmaster's resale division deliberately turned a blind eye to scalpers using bots and fake identities to circumvent Ticketmaster's own ticket limits. The math made the scheme obvious. If Ticketmaster sold a $200 ticket, it collected roughly $25 in service fees. If a scalper used TradeDesk to buy that ticket, flip it for $400 on Ticketmaster's own secondary platform, Ticketmaster collected an additional $76 in fees. Double the revenue, zero additional work. And in the 2024 DOJ lawsuit, prosecutors produced internal emails that made it worse. Ticketmaster employees admitted they turn a blind eye as a matter of policy to broker misbehavior. The company publicly lobbied against scalpers while privately building scalpers a VIP lounge inside their own platform. This is not a coincidence. This is a business decision. Close loop 1. The heat shield answer. You remember the question from the beginning of this video. How does a company with the worst consumer satisfaction score in corporate America keep growing faster than Amazon? Here is the answer. Ticketmaster is deliberately engineered to absorb consumer hatred on behalf of the people it actually serves: artists, promoters, and venues. When Beyoncé's tour goes on sale and seats disappear in 60 seconds, only to reappear on StubHub for 10 times the price, you are furious at Ticketmaster. Not at Beyoncé, not at Live Nation, not at the venue. But here is what actually happened. The artists team selected a pricing model that allowed this to occur. The venue participated in the revenue split. Live Nation structured the deal. Ticketmaster's platform executed it. And then Ticketmaster absorbed the public fury that should have been distributed across the entire chain. The hatred is a feature, not a flaw. It is the reason artists are still willing to work with them, and it is the reason the entire system remains intact. The heat shield doctrine. Ticketmaster absorbs consumer rage so artists don't have to. And now that you know this, go back and rewatch how artists respond to Ticketmaster controversies. Taylor Swift, Zach Bryan, Bruce Springsteen. They all publicly criticize Ticketmaster. They all express sympathy for their fans, and they all keep using Ticketmaster for every tour because the system works best when the heat shield is doing its job. The corporate espionage operation. On December 30th, 2020, Ticketmaster signed a deferred prosecution agreement with the Department of Justice and paid a $10 million criminal fine. Here is what they admitted to. Beginning in November 2013, Ticketmaster hired a former employee of a competitor called CrowdSurge. Through that employee, Ticketmaster executives gained access to stolen login credentials for CrowdSurge's proprietary systems. They used those credentials to access CrowdSurge's unreleased ticketing pages, their client lists, their pricing strategies, their unreleased technology. But it gets worse. According to US prosecutors, Ticketmaster executives held a division-wide summit, a company-wide meeting, where stolen CrowdSurge passwords were projected on screen and used live in front of dozens of employees. Ticketmaster maintained a detailed internal spreadsheet tracking every unreleased page CrowdSurge had built, using it to systematically steal clients. Internal communications explicitly stated the goal was to choke off CrowdSurge's business. The executive who ran the operation was Zishan Zaidi, Senior Vice President and General Manager of Ticketmaster's Artist Services Division. He pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit computer intrusions and wire fraud in October 2019. Before he was charged, Ticketmaster had promoted him. The company's public response was that this was an isolated incident, that the offending employees were terminated immediately upon discovery in 2017. What they did not say is that the operation ran for at least 4 years, that it involved senior executives, that it was conducted at a division-wide summit, and that the employees running it were rewarded for the stolen intelligence before anyone outside the company knew what was happening. The civil settlement was also remarkable. Ticketmaster settled the civil lawsuit by acquiring Songkick, the company that had been the victim of the espionage, for $110 million. They bought the company they had tried to destroy and called it a settlement. Total cost of corporate espionage operation $120 million. CrowdSurge and Songkick ceased operations entirely. The illegal scheme succeeded, the competitor was eliminated, and the total cost, $120 million, was absorbed as a line item. The data breach that should have been impossible. In May 2024, a hacking group known as Shiny Hunters breached Ticketmaster's databases. The stolen data included the names, addresses, emails, phone numbers, and partial payment information of 560 million customers worldwide. 560 million people. For context, that is more than the entire population of the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, and Australia combined. The breach went undetected until the hackers posted the stolen data on a dark web forum and publicly offered it for a $500,000 ransom. Ticketmaster did not find the breach. The hackers announced it. The reason this breach was possible gets to something structural about how Ticketmaster operates. They hold one of the largest centralized consumer databases on the planet. And because they operate as a functional monopoly, consumers have no alternative. You are forced to hand Ticketmaster your data. There is no competitive pressure to secure it, because there is no competitive pressure at all. The Astroworld Catastrophe. On November 5th, 2021, 10 people died at the Astroworld Festival in Houston, Texas. One of them was 9 years old. This was not an abstract corporate failure. These were human lives lost at an event that Live Nation promoted, organized, and controlled. What the official timeline shows is a cascade of decisions. By 9:15 in the morning, event checkpoints had been breached. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 200 fans had knocked over metal detectors at a VIP entrance. The Houston Fire Department had requested access for preparatory dry runs and was denied. When HFD personnel asked for radios, they were given a single cell phone number instead, which failed due to network overload when the crowd crisis began. Despite medics treating 54 patients by 3:54 p.m., despite police reporting dangerous crowd conditions at 3:15, Live Nation allowed the headlining performance to proceed. It took a mass casualty declaration to stop the show. In 2024, Live Nation formally recorded $454.9 million in estimated loss contingencies related to Astroworld settlements. The single line item cratered their operating income by 24%. But by 2025, operating income had rebounded 52%. The company absorbed the cost of 10 deaths and recovered in 18 months. The financial machine did not stop. It barely slowed down. When the 2010 merger was approved, the DOJ believed behavioral rules could contain a structural problem. They were wrong. By 2019, just 9 years after the merger, the DOJ was already finding violations. Live Nation had repeatedly threatened venues that chose competing ticketing software with the loss of Live Nation promoted tours, exactly what the consent decree forbade. The DOJ's response was to extend the consent decree through 2025, not to break up the company, to extend the diet, and tell it not to eat too much. Meanwhile, the company grew from $6.5 billion in annual revenue in 2010 to $25.2 billion in 2025. The behavioral restrictions generated fines. The fines were operational costs. They were cheaper than compliance. In May 2024, the DOJ finally ran out of patience. Attorney General Merrick Garland stood at a press conference and said, in plain English, it is time to break it up. The lawsuit filed that day, joined by 39 states and the District of Columbia, was 128 pages. It described a company that controlled promotion, venue management, artist representation, and ticketing in a closed loop. It accused Live Nation of tying its services, telling venues that if they wanted Live Nation stadium tours, they had to use Ticketmaster exclusively. And in April 2026, after a 6-week trial, a federal jury agreed. April 2026. Federal jury finds Live Nation and Ticketmaster label on all antitrust counts. Live Nation's executive vice president went on national television after the verdict. He said the company was not a monopoly. He said they would appeal. He did not address the internal emails the DOJ had entered into evidence. He did not address the findings that consumers had been overcharged by $1.72 per ticket across 257 venues over 5 years. He did not address the jury's unanimous verdict. He called it a misunderstanding. This is what the current picture actually looks like for anyone paying close attention. The 2022 Eras Tour. What really happened? November 15th, 2022. Taylor Swift's Eras Tour pre-sale opens. Ticketmaster's verified fan system had been promoted as the solution to scalper bots. Fans had pre-registered, they had received unique codes. The company had publicly stated the system could handle it. The system had been built to handle 1.5 million simultaneous users. 14 million showed up. The website crashed. Queue systems froze. Fans who had waited hours were ejected mid-purchase. Some received error messages for 6 consecutive hours. The general sale was cancelled entirely. Tickets that did make it through, mostly to scalpers and brokers who had circumvented the verified fan requirements, appeared immediately on secondary markets. Here is what the collapse actually revealed. Ticketmaster had no financial incentive to invest in server infrastructure capable of handling this load, because it faced no competition for stadium-tier event routing. A monopoly does not need to stress test its architecture. There is nowhere else to go. And because the revenue model is built on service fees rather than software quality, the financial incentive to invest in back-end resilience is structurally misaligned. The more chaotic the pre-sale, the more tickets end up on the secondary market, where Ticketmaster collects additional fees. The failure was not a technical accident. It was the natural output of a company whose incentives are inverted. The margin compression crisis. The March 2026 DOJ settlement introduced a structural change that cannot be undone, a hard cap on ticketing service fees at 15% of face value. For a company whose revenue model has historically depended on fees that can reach 30% to 50% of ticket face value, this is not a regulatory inconvenience. It is a fundamental restructuring of the business model. Compounding this, the April 2026 jury, finding that consumers were overcharged by $1.72 per ticket, establishes a damages precedent. Under the Clayton Act, antitrust damages are mandatorily trebled. The total exposure to the state's claims approaches $450 million before offsets. And the state's lawyers are currently before Judge Arun Subramaniam, arguing for the ultimate remedy, forced divestiture, a complete structural separation of Ticketmaster from Live Nation. If that happens, something becomes immediately visible that the integrated model has successfully hidden for 15 years. Ticketmaster, as a standalone company, is a B2B software vendor with a deeply toxic consumer brand, an aging technical infrastructure, and no natural supply of attractive content. Its margins exist because Live Nation forces artists and venues into its ecosystem. Strip that coercion, and you have a SaaS pricing with a -62 net promoter score trying to win open RFP bids against SeatGeek. Close loop 2, the governance answer. Earlier in this video, we raised a question about the corporate espionage operation. Federal prosecutors proved that senior Ticketmaster executives used stolen passwords at a company-wide meeting, and then the company promoted the employees running the scheme. So who exactly is in charge here? The answer reveals a governance structure that is not incidentally dysfunctional. It is architecturally designed to minimize accountability. In 2022, the DOJ discovered that 2 executives, Ariel Emanuel and Mark Shapiro of Endeavor Group Holdings, were sitting on the Live Nation board of directors. Endeavor directly competed with Live Nation in promoting VIP packages and live event experiences. This was a textbook violation of Section 8 of the Clayton Act, which forbids executives from sitting on the boards of competing companies. Both were forced to resign immediately, not after a regulatory process, immediately, because it was that obvious. The company's internal legal and compliance team had allowed this interlock to exist for years. There is a pattern here. The corporate espionage scheme ran for 4 years before any public accountability. The consent decree violations ran for 9 years before the DOJ escalated. The board interlock existed until the DOJ noticed. When a company's response to every violation is, "We did not know, it is fixed now," and that response repeats on the same schedule for 30 years, there is only one accurate conclusion. They knew. They knew. They just calculated that the cost of getting caught was less than the cost of compliance. The competitive erosion no one is talking about. Even before the DOJ verdict, Ticketmaster's market share was quietly declining in every segment except the one it controls by force. In secondary market resale, from 22% in 2024 to roughly 15% by mid-2026, StubHub has captured 30% to 40% of resale volume. SeatGeek and Vivid Seats are accelerating. In sports franchise, primary ticketing from 65% in 2024 to approximately 58% by 2026. SeatGeek has been systematically winning enterprise contracts from NFL and NBA teams. In independent and boutique ticketing, Dice now controls roughly 22% of the independent market in Western economies, with a 95% fan retention rate. Their pricing model, transparent, all-in, no drip fees, is converting mid-sized venues at an accelerating pace. The company is being squeezed from above by regulators, from below by transparent pricing competitors, and from the side by sports-focused challengers. Its only defensible position is the one it maintains through force, the exclusive venue contract structure that the DOJ is now legally dismantling. And for the first time in its history, it cannot buy more time. Before we conclude, this requires something that most coverage of Ticketmaster skips entirely: a fair accounting. What Ticketmaster does brilliantly. First, enterprise-grade infrastructure at a scale that no competitor can currently match. No platform on earth can reliably process millions of simultaneous, high-intent transactions without catastrophic failure. That is not nothing. The Era store collapse happened at 14 times the expected load. Most financial infrastructure in the world would fail at twice its rated capacity. The fact that Ticketmaster manages the world's largest events, hundreds of thousands of concurrent buyers, at any functional level requires engineering sophistication that SeatGeek, Dice, and Eventbrite have not proven they can replicate at the stadium tier. Second, fraud prevention infrastructure. SafeTix, Ticketmaster's encrypted rotating barcode system, is genuinely sophisticated. Every 15 seconds, the digital ticket refreshes. Screenshots do not work. Screen recordings do not work. The ticket is tied to the specific device. For major events, this provides a level of access control and anti-counterfeiting that venues require. AXS has a competing system nobody else does at this scale. Third, the company's global reach. Ticketmaster operates in 55 countries, processes tickets across 460 venues globally. In 2025, for the first time, international fan count exceeded domestic. No single competitor has built the legal infrastructure, payment processing relationships, and venue contract network to match this global footprint. CTS Eventim dominates Europe, but not North America. SeatGeek is primarily North American. The global live events market is growing toward a projected $270 billion by 2030, and Ticketmaster is currently the only entity positioned to capture it at full scale. 3 structural failures. The first structural failure is the inverted incentive architecture. Ticketmaster's revenue model is built on opacity: service fees, facility fees, processing fees, each one hidden until the final click. The company invested in this model because, in a monopoly, checkout abandonment is not a threat. There is nowhere else to go. This inverted the company's product development priorities for 15 years. They optimized for extraction rather than experience. And now that regulators are forcing transparency, the company lacks the institutional knowledge to compete on merit. The second structural failure is technical debt as a competitive moat. Ticketmaster's backend infrastructure is ancient by technology standards. The core ticketing engine runs on architecture from the early 2000s. They have layered modern front ends over legacy plumbing. This creates catastrophic failure modes as the eras 2 approved and makes it nearly impossible to deploy the AI native mobile first features that competitors are building from the ground up. They spend on legal defense rather than engineering because legal defense protects the monopoly. Better engineering only matters if competition is real. The third structural failure is what I will call the dependency trap. Ticketmaster's margins exist because of forced integration, not because of product excellence. Remove the coercive venue contracts, remove the artist guarantee flywheel, remove Live Nation's ability to threaten tour routing, and what remains is a software company with 15% margins and a minus 62 net promoter score competing against VC-backed challengers with 4.9-star app reviews. What a smarter version of this company would do. The realistic path to surviving the next decade is not fighting the DOJ verdict, it is using it. A smarter Ticketmaster accepts structural separation proactively before it is imposed, spins itself out as a standalone enterprise technology company, competes on the merits of its load balancing infrastructure, fraud prevention tooling, and global venue relationships as a premium B2B SaaS vendor, not a monopoly gatekeeper. Adopt transparent all-in pricing universally and immediately. Not because the DOJ requires it, because every generation of consumer entering the ticket buying market now compares Ticketmaster to Airbnb, Shopify, and Apple Pay. Against those benchmarks, the checkout experience is a competitive liability. Invest in AI native dynamic discovery. The consumer journey in 2030 does not start at a ticketing website. It starts with an AI assistant. Ticketmaster must embed itself in the discovery layer through Google AI overviews, through Apple Wallet integrations, through social platform commerce, or risk becoming a back-end utility that consumers never consciously choose. Closed loop 3. The lie question. We asked at the beginning of this video. A federal jury ruled Ticketmaster is an illegal monopoly. The CEO said they are not. One of them is lying. And the answer tells you everything about how power actually works in America. Here's the honest answer. Neither of them is exactly lying. They are using different definitions of the same word. The DOJ defines monopoly using the Sherman Act standard, a company that maintains its dominant position through exclusionary conduct rather than superior products or services. By that standard, a federal jury unanimously agreed that Ticketmaster qualifies. Live Nation's executive vice president defines monopoly by including every ticketing transaction in America: sports, college events, self-serve platforms, secondary markets. By that broader definition, you can argue Ticketmaster has 40% market share rather than 80%. And this is how power actually works. Power does not usually lie. Power redefines the terms of the conversation. Power controls which questions get asked. Power selects the metrics that make the answer look different. Next time you watch a CEO respond to a damaging finding, any CEO, any company, watch for the definitional pivot. Watch for the moment when they stop defending the allegation and start arguing about what the word means. That pivot is the tell. It means they cannot win the fight on the facts. So they are relocating the fight to the definitions. And recognizing that pattern in a single press conference will help you understand the next 100 corporate controversies you will ever watch. The single truth this video revealed is this: Ticketmaster did not build a monopoly despite being hated. It built a monopoly by being hated, because absorbing consumer rage on behalf of artists and venues made it structurally indispensable to everyone in the room except you. That is not a ticketing story. That is a power story. And it is the oldest model in capitalism. Find a way to make someone else bear the cost of your behavior, and the behavior becomes very difficult to stop. Next, we are turning to a company that built an equally quiet empire, except this one operates inside the American healthcare system, where the customers cannot choose to go elsewhere for a different reason entirely. United Health Group controls more of the American health insurance market than Live Nation controls of concerts. Its subsidiary, Change Healthcare, processes 1 in every 3 patient records in the United States. And in February 2024, hackers shut it down for 3 weeks. What happened to the medical system during those 3 weeks? And what does United Health Group do with the data it holds on 50 million Americans that its competitors have never been able to see? Subscribe to Strategy Lens so you do not miss it. Not because it helps us, because the people who understand how these systems actually operate see the world differently than everyone else. And that difference, compounded over time, is worth more than any subscription you will ever pay for. The most dangerous monopoly is not the one the government is investigating. It is the one nobody has thought to look at yet. This is Strategy Lens. We'll see you inside the machine.